For more on this, I want to bring in Michael Bossercue. He is a global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. And Michael, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So new Canadian prime ministers usually make their first visit to the U.S. What do you make of Carney's choice to head first to Europe and to meet with the French president, the King now, and the British prime minister?
Well, if you're ever going to send a message to Donald Trump that things aren't going the way of the old days, this was it. And kudos for him, for Mark Carney, for doing that. And I think, beyond the symbolism of sticking it to the Americans, to the American leadership, I think this also shows a reorientation, hopefully, of Canadian foreign policy, but especially Canadian economic policy, to reorient it away from the north-south axis and more east-west. We, as Canada, of course I'm Canadian, we need to really think ahead in these economic times of relying more on European partners and reestablishing relationships in Asia-Pacific to help bolster the economy at a time when things are not looking good when it comes to trade and other relationships with the U.S.
What do you think Carney hopes to achieve with this visit? He has said that we are masters in our own home, borrowing an old French Quebec expression, and saying that he's not really going there to get formal public support, but he is going there to, as you say, build those commercial relationships, talk about national security concerns given the threats from the U.S. president. What more do you think he's trying to achieve? And do you think we will hear of some of that support or see some more symbolic gestures, if you will, say from the King?
Yeah, well, reading CBC reporting and learning today that there could be an election called as soon as the end of the week, if I were Mr. Carney's advisors, I would try to be a little bit more calculated. And of course, symbolism is nice. It might get you more votes on Vancouver Island, where, support for the monarchy is very high. But I think at the moment, most Canadians want to see, what are you going to do for improving the economy? We have so many problems at home. So hopefully, it's very rare, I think, in my experience, where foreign trips or forays translate into political capital at home, especially when times are tough. So I think it would be good for him to translate this visit into concrete accomplishments. Okay, this is what it's going to mean for the Canadian economy. I think he needs to get that message over the Atlantic back home as soon as possible for him to, remain as prime minister.
Otherwise, it becomes just a photo op. Is that what you're kind of implying?
Yeah, exactly. And if there's one thing people here in this part of the world, it is different circumstances, of course, but Moldova, Ukraine, they're tired of photo ops. They don't want to hear words. They want to see action. And I think I venture to say a lot of people in various democracies also feel that way. The way the world economy, the way world security is going right now. We want to end our days feeling good about where the economy is going, and especially about our security.
I mean, just to kind of maybe challenge you a tiny bit on that, these are unusual times, right? I mean, this is a time where we have an American president threatening our country, threatening Canada's sovereignty, threatening us with economic ruin through a trade war. So I just wonder whether trying to build and foster and kind of buttress these relationships with old allies such as France and the UK is something that's needed in that context.
Yeah, sure. Don't get me wrong. I mean, for sure, he's doing exactly the right thing in that regard. Is that, I really hope one conversation they do have, it's boring Mr. Poilievre's idea, but he came up with it, is to discuss reorienting energy flows from north-south, Canada to the US, to Europe, to Western Europe, to Asia-Pacific. And Mr. Poilievre said that Canada would be doing itself a favor, but also doing Europe and Ukraine a favor by, for example, looking at LNG exports, seeing how we could ramp up very quickly those exports to Europe so it could help wean Europe off of the Russian energy and hence stop the flow of money to the Putin war machine. Concrete things like that would be a fantastic thing. One more thing, if I can. I'm sure everyone's read by now what the Trump administration has done to Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, cutting them off financially. Radio Free Europe was the kind of digital Berlin Wall against Russian disinformation propaganda. I think conversations also need to happen with Mr. Carney in Europe about what we can do immediately to rescue those services. Canada has a lot of great journalists, a lot of talent. It could even go to the point of refunding Radio Canada International for those foreign language services that have been cut a long time ago, especially Russian and Ukrainian.
I want to ask you something, and I don't want to overplay it, underplay it. You tell me. The Prime Minister Mark Carney makes his first visit. The first foreign leader he meets is the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. I'm asking this, and then it's King Charles, and then Prime Minister Keir Starmer. I'm asking you in the context because I was on the air, and I think a lot of people remember this. When Keir Starmer was in Washington standing next to Donald Trump, he was asked a question about Canada and the threats that the American president has been making. And his response was, I'm not going to answer that question. Basically, there was no kind of full-throated support. He said, you're trying to divide us. He wouldn't even provide any kind of even lip service in that moment next to Donald Trump. And then the reporter tried to ask a follow-up question, which was a pretty basic question. And Trump said, that's enough. Do you think that's on purpose?
Well, let me put it this way. I think the Prime Minister Starmer was buttering up Mr. Trump so much, Trump's cholesterol level probably went through the roof. But kind of joking aside, I think this is something that foreign leaders are finding, is that as much as they can to not provoke Mr. Trump, they'll get out of the White House, out of the Oval Office without what happened to Mr. Zelensky. I watched very closely, for example, how the King of Jordan went and sat in the Oval Office and really took it from Mr. Trump, trying to get in a few lines. But the King Abdullah, knowing very, very well that if he were to accept wholeheartedly or, in bulk what Mr. Trump said, that would get him in trouble back home. So these are very, very difficult times. We're dealing with a American leader who I think is unpredictable, unhinged, very transactional. But I think, kind of end this, I think it was very wise for Mr. Carney not to go into the Oval Office and possibly face the same humiliation or similar to it that Mr. Zelensky did, being called governor, talking about Canada as the 51st state. This is not on. We have to fight against this kind of stuff. So that, I give him credit for that.
Michael, thank you. Michael Bosserque is a global affairs analyst and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council.